Hello, welcome to another video of making a programming language with JavaScript. Today we're doing part 5b, and now we're coining up how to add state into a programming language. As always, the code for this part will be linked in my GitHub repo, which will be in the description below. Please check that out if you're interested in following along. For today's coding part, we're going to be implementing our new grammar that we introduced last time. So there's a few things here, just as a reminder. We have a variable declaration. So now we can keep track of variable state. And we have a print statement based that's pretty much baked into the language. We also have blocks. So a block is any declaration that's inside these squiggly brackets, and anything that happens inside stays inside. And our primary grammar rule here has a new source called identifier. So to make this a bit more clear, I want to show you what all of this outputs at the end of this coding part. All right, so at the end of this, we'll be able to do what we just mentioned before. So let's go into our programming languages repo, and let's set var a equals to, let's say, 5. And then within this block, we want to set var b equals to, let's say, 1. Oops, var b equals to 1. And we have to end it with a semicolon like this. So this is a block, and anything that's declared inside the block stays inside the block. So that means we can change var b to, let's say, 3. And what happens if we do a plus b? It's not going to be 5 plus 1 because that 1 was declared inside the block and it doesn't count. It's going to be var a equals 5 plus var b equals to 3, which will be 8. So if we do that, print a plus b here, we have what we expect, 8. And that's what we're doing in this video here. We're going to make sure that we can keep track of both state and also environment. It's quite a big step, and let's get started. Now, on the right side here, I have a copy of our grammar here, just so we can refer to it when we're programming. So I've opened up Expr.js, and here we want to add a few more things. So remember, we have two new things here. We have an assignment block here, assignment, and we also have a variable declaration here. So let's do that first. So our class assign, it has two things that we want to give to it. It has a name and also a value. And where's that come from here? So basically, what we call the name is the identifier, and then the assignment here is really just the value, because it's like, for example, it's var a equals to 5. Next up, we have our actual variable, which is just the name here. Variable declaration here. So it's var something identifier. So that's it. And then we want to export these two as well. Now we're going to create a new file called Stmt.js, Stmt.js. And with this Sttement.js, we're going to code up some of the rules for statement. And what is statement here? So statement is either expression, print, or block. So our first class is going to be class statement. It's going to be our base class. Doesn't do much other than have this except method. Now we have block. So you can see here statement, and block is one of the things that statement can output. And what does block do? Block is basically anything inside that squiggly bracket. See here, block, anything inside the squiggly bracket. So that's why we have basically just statements equals to statements. Next up, so statement can also be an expression. And that's basically what the expression accepts. Just one thing here. And then third, our statement can be a print statement. And so what was print here? Let's go back to print. And print is basically, it just prints an expression. So that's why it also accepts an expression. And last but not least, a statement can be a var. So a var has a name and also an initializer, as you can see here, name and initializer. And then we're going to export all this so that we can use it later on. Now that we have our expression statements in place, we're going to open up Parser.js and update that so we can parse all the new things that we have in our grammar. So what are we parsing? Well, that's what we just imported, what we just made in Expression.js and Statement.js. So first we want to import our new things, variable and assign from Expression.js. And also we want Statement.js as well. Everything here, print, expression, var, block. All right. And I've just updated the comments here for our grammar. So first off, our parse method here, it's going to be a bit different because parse is now accepting an array of statements. And basically every time we keep on pushing a declaration. So you can see here, so our program is a top level. And the second level is declaration. So declaration is either a variable declaration or a statement. And basically just keeps on going down here until it finds something. So that's what this is doing. So when we call this declaration, it keeps on going down this all these grammar rules until it finds something and then adds it to statements here. And that's what it returns, statements. So next up we have expression. Expression is down here, but it's what we originally had anyway. It's going to return this dot assignment. So we have declaration up here, and then we have expression. And then expression, which returns everything down here. So that means we have to code up something for variable declaration, statement, print statement, and block. So let's get started with declaration here. So what declaration will do is it's going to match that token type var. And if it does match, then we're going to return the var declaration. Otherwise, we're going to return statement. Basically, just what this rule says is a variable declaration or a statement. And we have this synchronized method here. If it doesn't match any of these, we're going to basically skip over everything until we find a semicolon and then return it. Okay, so if we have a statement, what is a statement? Statement basically says if, well, let's look here. Does our token type match a print? If it does, we're going to return the print statement. Does it match a left brace? So remember, a left brace is how a block starts. If it does, we're going to return a new expression, which is a block, and then we're going to call this block within that new expression. And then if it doesn't match either of these two, so it doesn't match print, doesn't match block, it means it's expression. So it's going to print expression statement. And then finally, we have this print method here, print statement. So what's print really do? Print basically just says, okay, let's grab that expression. So it's going to call this expression, and then it's going to consume that last semicolon. And if there's no semicolon, then we print the error. Otherwise, we're going to turn a new print object with the value of the expression. Now moving on to a variable declaration. So variable declaration, it's going to call this consume, and what it does is it's going to see if this next token is an identifier. If it's not an identifier, then we exit and print out this error here that we expect a variable name. Otherwise, we're going to figure out what the initializer is. So we're going to match. So the next thing is that we're going to match an equal sign because that's how this works. A variable declaration expects a var, an identifier, an equal sign, and then maybe an expression or maybe or not. Because Lox allows you to just set a null variable as well. So once we have the initializer, after calling this expression, we're going to consume the final semicolon. Afterwards, we're going to turn a new var where we have the name is basically just the identifier here, and the initializer is just this expression here. And finally, expression statement. What's expression statement again? So if we go all the way back up here, after statement here. So if it's not a print, not block, then it's expression statement here. An expression statement is defined right here. It's going to say that expression is this expression, which is going to call this and find anything that matches if it keeps on going, traversing down our list of grammar rules, and return that expression. Next up, we have block. So block is part of statement. And what is a block? It's any declaration inside the left brace and the right brace. And because it's a declaration, it could be basically, so we start up here again. So block declaration, we start up here again, and we keep on going down until we are able to finish everything that's inside the block. So what we're doing is we're going to check that as long as the next token is not a right brace and we're not at the end, we're going to keep on pushing, keep on calling this declaration and pushing up to this array here. At the very end, once we reach either right brace or the end of the file, we're going to consume the right brace and return the statements. So that's what you expect from a block. All right. The final method here is going to be assignment. Now, let's take a look at what assignment is here. Assignment is identifier equals to either assignment or equality. Now, how is this different from variable declaration? Well, variable declaration initializes the variable, but the assignment says that we can reassign that variable to something else. Pretty cool. So our expression, we're going to call this equality here. And if the next token keeps matches the equal sign, we're going to say that equals is basically the previous value, and then the value is this assignment. And if our expression is another variable, we're just going to if the expression isn't a variable, that means we're reassigning that variable here. So that's what this does. That's why we're using new assign name and value. And at the very end, we're going to return the expression. And then we're also going to go under our primary method here. And remember, under primary, we added a new identifier. So if this .match token type is identifier, we're going to return a new variable. And that's it for the parser. Next up, before we actually go to our interpreter and make updates to that, we do need to introduce the concept of an environment. So we're going to create Environment.js here in our source. And why do we have to introduce the concept environment? Well, that's basically because we're introducing block. Now remember, anything that happens inside the block stays in the block. So that means we need to keep track of environments inside a block. So we need this before we can make updates to our interpreter. Now first up, our environment. Each environment has a reference to the environment of the immediate enclosing scope. So whenever we look up a variable, we're going to walk up the chain from the innermost until we keep on going out and out and out until we find a variable. And if you recall from the previous video, it's called a parent pointer tree. So our constructor will have reference to the enclosing one. And if the enclosing one is null, that means we're at the uppermost or outermost parent tree. And then we're going to keep track of all of our values inside the environment using an object, where the key is just a string to the variable, and it's going to be under this.values. So whenever we need to get the environment, we're going to use this get method here. And the parameter is going to be a name. If the name's lexeme is in this values, we're just going to return whatever that was. And then if we can't find that, we're going to check if is this the outermost environment. If it's not, we're going to grab it from our parent environment. And this is how this not enclosing that get is how we keep on going up that chain until we get something. And if it still doesn't return anything, then we throw this error saying that we didn't define that variable anywhere and it's an undefined variable. And other than getting a variable, we can also assign a variable here. Very similar here. If it's already in the start values, we just return it. If it's not in the start values, then we're going to assign it to this. We're going to assign it. Otherwise, we're going to reassign the variable. So remember, assigning means that the variable already exists. What we're doing is just assigning it to something else. And finally, we have define. Define basically just says, okay, we're going to set that variable to a value and we're going to introduce that new variable here. Finally, we're going to export Environment.js. Now, in order for this to work, we have to go into our RuntimeError.js. And we have to say super, just because that we want our runtime error to grab everything that extends from error so that environment will work whenever we throw a runtime error. All right, our next big update will come into Interpreter.js. Now, Interpreter.js has to keep track of environment, so that's why we're going to import our environment here. And then we're going to add a new constructor to environment so that every environment, every time we parse an environment, every time we interpret an environment, we're going to keep track of a separate environment class. And that's how we make sure that we have block declarations scoped to each block. And then our interpret statement is going to change a bit because we're not interpreting a single thing. We're interpreting an array of statements here. And then we're going to really just iterate over each statement. And then we're going to execute each statement and then push the values onto this new array here. And what's execute? Basically, we're going to call statement.accept this. And remember, this is the visit pattern that we introduced a few videos back. So what are we updating Interpreter.js to? Well, everything that we introduced in our new grammar rule. So we parse a lot of these things, and after parsing, we need to interpret them to their appropriate values. So our first thing here is our block. So how do we execute a block? What do we do with this? So we look at our environment here. So we're going to keep track of our previous environments by calling this. And then if we have a block, that means we have a new environment. So basically, we keep track of this new environment. We're going to iterate over all these statements. And then once we're done with this block, we're going to throw away this new environment. And then we're going to set our environment back to the previous one. So this is how we keep track of things in the block and make sure that everything inside block stays in block. Next up, we have the visit block statement here. So whenever a block is called, we're going to call this, whenever we have a block, we're going to call this execute block, which is over here with the statements. And then also a new environment with the previous environment as the property here. So remember, this is how we do the parent pointer tree. And then we have a visit expression statement. Pretty standard. We're just going to evaluate the expression. Visit print statement. So print statement is pretty simple here. We're going to evaluate the expression And then we're just going to console log that value and return that value. About for statement here. So whenever we have a variable, we're going to initialize the value to null because it could be null. And then we're going to check if is the statement initializer, is that null or not? If it's not null, then we're going to evaluate that to value and return. And then we're going to define that inside our environment with the name and the value here. And what about visit expression, assignments expression? So assignment is checking that this variable does exist, and we're going to assign a new value to that variable. So it's very similar to a visit var statements where we're just going to evaluate the expression, and then we're going to call this environment.assign instead of define. And we're going to assign a new value to that variable. And what's a visit variable expression? So basically, if we get a variable, that means that in order to interpret that, we just get the value of that variable by calling this.environment.get. And that's all the changes we are making to Interpreter.js. And our very last step, we're going to make a couple of quick edits to Lox.js. So for our static run method here, our parser is actually returning statements instead of expressions. So we're going to make a variable change here. And then our interpreter is also going to be interpreting statements. So it's really just a renaming of the variable to make it more clear that our parser is returning statements, which is an array. And our last change here is if we do run into a runtime error, we're going to console log error.message instead of just the error so that we get something useful here. And that's it for our updates here. If you look at the GitHub repo, you're going to see some test files. If you're interested in seeing how to test all of these, make sure to check that out. Otherwise, after all this, you'll have a interpreter fully working with variable declarations, with statements, and with blocks. That's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to look at how does control flow work in a programming language. A control flow means basically things like if, else statements, while, and stuff like that. If you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you're interested in being notified when the next video is out, please hit subscribe. Thank you.